Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Daniel chapter 3, and we're going to get to chapter 3. I kind of was sidetracked in the last study because I wanted to emphasize and encourage one of the ways that strengthens and encourages our faith, and that is fulfilled prophecy. And a lot of what that we're studying in Daniel is fulfilled prophecy. And I don't let anyone dismiss that. This is history here, right? I'm sorry, this is history that we can look back on this and say, this is fulfilled prophecy. So when I think about the last kingdom here, the feet of iron and clay, and then that following Jesus' return, this is why I have strong faith in that, because of God's word that He brought to pass brought to pass um, already. And I'll say this, and then I'm going to get to chapter 3. This is why I really, really despise these false prophets, because they cheapen or attempt to cheapen the ministry of prophets and prophecies with their fake prophecies, because they lie so much. In reality, do you know people really don't believe half that stuff? And then on the flip side of that, you got people who do believe it, and then they ruin their lives. There's a lot of ways that they do. But anyway, all right, let's just get to it though. In chapter 3, now I left off, and I want with this thought in a couple of sessions ago, when it said in chapter 2, verse 46, it says, "Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell down and paid homage to Daniel and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, 'Your God is indeed the God of gods and Lord of lords.'" So even though he paid homage to him, in his heart, what I'm saying is, the king was still the king. And as we see right here, this is just surface stuff. He really, really, his heart has not changed. And I think sometimes it represents people today in that people can be religious. And and notice this, Nebuchadnezzar is he's certainly not denying the existence of God, but in his heart, he's certainly not really submitted to God. Okay? And we're going to see that as we get into chapter 3. So verse 1 says, "King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon." Now, this is amazing. Remember, he just bowed down to God, and now he makes a statue 90 feet high. That's a tall statue. It's about 9 stories. Think about a 9-story building. And then verse 2, King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the province to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the province assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, a herald went out, a proclamation loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drums, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Now, before we go on, this is kind of interesting here. Well, let me read the next uh, chapter here. It says, therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue that the king Nebuchadnezzar set up. Now, I'm going to say this. This is not the point that this story is making. What I'm going to say is, I think as far as the spirit that is working in the world, the spirit by Lucifer, Satan, the dragon, you could see it here, where Nebuchadnezzar is king, right? In this sense, ruling the entire planet, every nation, right? And then he sets up an image and says, now worship the image. Now, I only say that because if you go to Revelations chapter 13, you see the same thing happening, where you have the beast, and then you have the second beast, who was a false prophet. They make an image, and then people worship the image. That's just, again, the similarities to me are just eerily similar, okay? But it is interesting that Nebuchadnezzar makes his image and says, worship it, worship this image. Remember, after proclaiming that God, Daniel's God, was the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So much for that. Verse 8 says, some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. Now, remember I told you that when Daniel was put over all of the wise men, we're going to see their jealousy. We're going to see their hatred, right? And which is kind of, again, which is amazing, because you would think, well, because of these guys, we are alive, right? And still have our positions. But they hated them, and you're going to see it here, verse 9. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews, emphasis on Jews, right? There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And as I said, I'm going to borrow the late Pastor Carlton Pearson's phrase here, a bad Negro. He said it with greater flair, though. It says, these men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Now, this is kind of interesting, that I think it does also shine light on the people of God, that they can always, as long during this age, face this kind of persecution. And without a doubt, most of the time they will not be delivered. Okay, so I just want to throw that out there. Verse 13, then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold statue I've set up? Now, remember, back here, what happened to, your God, you guys' God is Lord and God, right? As I said, it was lip service. But let me just say this: God is going to do a work in Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, So stay tuned. Verse 15. Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, bow down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship, you will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Well, we know the answer to that. It's the same God that gave Daniel the dream that none of your wise men could solve. So, verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of the blazing fire. And he could rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you to know as king, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. That's one of the most powerful responses in the Bible, right? Think about this. That they say right before they look. First of all, we know our God can deliver you. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down. In other words, if he does not, we're not going to bow. Now, this is a profound, profound response. As I said, as we move forward, and we kind of live in this now in America, we don't. We are blessed that our Constitution protects us from this kind of dictatorship. Although I think there's one man running. Okay, he would love to have this kind of power. He would love to. And I think anybody with this kind of power, and especially this add on ungodly, that they're ungodly. I think anyone would be tempted, right? When you add ungodly, the sinful nature, that you add that to the mix, and then you got power. But he said, we will not. We will not. And in some respects, you think about this, they are already in a different paradigm. They remember Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were they left their homeland, and now they're living in a foreign land. But their perspective is more, again, what? Eternal, not on this earth. Even though they were, by the way, they were doing well. Remember, they had great positions. And they could have said, well, let me just bow. Let me just bow. Right? Let me just bow. He says, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage. And the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary. Now, it was kind of overkill, right? Heated up way more. Then he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Notice they were tied up and throw them into the furnace of the blazing fire. So these men in their trousers, so these men in their trousers, robes, and head coverings and other clothing were tied up and thrown into the fire of the blazing fires. The king's command was so urgent, and the fire was extremely hot, and the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They burned them up. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Now, God is showing his power, right? God is showing his power and his might. Because remember, they were tied up. Then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, jumped up in alarm, and he said to his advisors, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, Your Majesty, they replied. Now think about these guys too, who was kind of gloating over their demise. Think about this. They probably was gloating, like, okay, yeah, we're going to move up. And for hate's sake, we destroyed our enemy. Verse 25, he exclaimed, look, I see 4 men not tied walking around the fire, unharmed. And the fourth looks like the son of the gods. Now, some of your King James may say the son of God. But remember, Nebuchadnezzar's vision, he doesn't know what he's looking at, but the son of the gods. And this was probably an angel. This was an angel that was sent to deliver them. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of the blazing fire and called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, your servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And when the satraps, prefects, governors, those who try to set them up, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on their bodies of these men. Not a hair of their hair, not a hair of their heads were singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of the fire on them. And Nebuchadnezzar explained, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servant who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. Now, haven't we been through this before with Nebuchadnezzar? He says, therefore I issue decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb, and his house made a garbage dump. But there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. And then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Well, again, he's getting there, but he's not there. We're going to get in the next chapter. We're going to see his pride. Now, I think what should be praiseworthy here is the attitude and the perspective of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because think about this. Should anyone or thing ever come between or stop us from serving God? Stop us, in other words, if I could get ahead, the mythical, selling your soul to Satan, which is silly. But what would I do to get ahead? Would I deny God? Would I not? Would I do? Think about this. All they had to avoid trouble, all they had to do was just bow down. And you can imagine this sea of people that when the music started, everybody bowed down except 3. And of course, in this sea of people, they stood out, literally stood up, stood out, because when everybody bowed down, people could see these 3 people, these 3 men standing. But all he had to do to avoid trouble. And let me say this, God in his sovereignty, he made his point. Most Christians who would have had the courage to stand for their faith, stand for their God, would die. We see this with the early Christians and some of their martyrdom under Rome, and many of them, they died horrible death. They died torturous death, standing for their faith. So even though this here is a testament, it also, not everyone is going to be delivered. Now, even though, like I say, our Constitution protects us, but what about, would you steal for your boss? Would you, to get ahead, what would you do? Would you compromise morality? And I'll throw this shout out for sure. I think the evangelical Christian world, in their support of their candidate today is they are they have bowed. See, because this candidate, every principle that they claim to stand by, the candidate that they support violates that. So why are they supporting this candidate? Anyway, that's my rant for the day. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.